seated. What do we do with our morning on this anniversary of October 7th? It is my immense privilege to invite up Dr. Mark Poznansky, who gives us a model today of turning mourning into meaningful action. Dr. Poznansky.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Robinson, and Hag Sameach to everyone. It's quite a daunting point here, both speaking on the second anniversary of the October 7th attacks and also being in the presence of such amazing rabbis, Rabbi Robinson, Rabbi Gardenschwartz, Cantor Rosenberg, Rabbi Dan Nessen, and the most amazing Rabbi Elisa Berger, who is a very special member of our family in terms of how she looked after my father. I have to follow in the footsteps in many ways of those eloquent and wise rabbis to put together some thoughts on what I experienced and what I did following the October 7th attacks in 2023. I have at this time a few disclosures to make, and I have to make them. I'm British, and so what I have up on the rabbis is a British accent. And therefore, also, being British, it comes with a sense of humor that I have been almost entirely dependent on, especially British comedy and laughter, to get through difficult times. And I would just reference Rabbi Gardenschwartz's sermon during the high holidays on the importance of laughter. There's absolutely no question that it's enormously therapeutic and must be continued through the most difficult of times. I'm also not a Torah scholar. I'm a physician and scientist, and I speak here for myself and not for the institutions I work for or am affiliated with. Interestingly, although I'm not a Torah scholar, when I hear the Torah read or I read it, I think of it as an amazing, best-selling biography of our family, dating back thousands of years and reading about relatives long gone, but importantly with enormous messages to pass on. And also not least because my father was called Jacob Benjamin. I have a link, obviously. And interestingly, when the rabbis talk about Moses and other of our relatives, I take it quite personally, especially when they're critical of what they said, their actions, or their thoughts. So when I think about Sukkot, I also think about it personally. I've been very, very privileged and lucky in my relative youth to travel in many deserts, the Sinai, the Negev, the Sahara, the Atacama, and I've learnt about those deserts. And the central premise of Sukkot is building a shelter in a desert, not in a suburban garden. And that has enormous meaning because in deserts, one is extremely vulnerable without shelter. And then the other thing that is remarkable in deserts is the miracle of life existing in a desert. For some of you who may have strolled or wandered or trekked through deserts, coming across living things, whether it would be a lulav tree or a palm, or even water in an oasis, is a truly miraculous vision. And I think that's some of the essence, as I read this personally, that it means to me. We have to think about the historical and personal component of all of this. One also has to be smart in a desert and learn how to fend for oneself and one's community in this harsh environment. Shelter, food, and water are not a given, and how you manage these amongst the extensive barren regions and occasional remarkable oases where water comes to the surface is critical. Israelis are world leaders, as you know, in living in and making the desert blue. And I remember the very, very first time I went to Israel when I was 8 years old and saw that for myself. It was literally mind-blowing. The desert is also a place where it is remarkably silent, and the crystalline air allows you to contemplate one's place and meaning in this ridiculously large galaxy and universe that we live amongst, and actually witness the movement of our planet within it as you stare up into the night sky in this absolutely silent environment. The desert is not also a place where you can simply wait to have nature or God deliver on your needs. You need to act to protect and sustain yourself and your community and build shelter and find food. I do accept that at times one could benefit from manna from heaven, of course, and some direct advice from God about how to handle oneself, but most of the time you have to look after yourself and your community. So, I've been asked to talk about events I've experienced since October the 7th and the rise of anti-Semitism in healthcare, particularly from the trenches, and how we can gather our resources to combat it. This does make it seem like there is a war, just the use of the word trenches, a war for territory, a war for ideas, a war of words, a war of actions, a war between peoples, between countries, religions, also within peoples, religions, and countries. What are the lessons of Sukkot for our time of rising anti-Semitism? And for those who read the ADL report, they're declaring anti-Semitism normalized in the United States of America. When I experienced the aftermath of October the 7th, I asked a scientific question. In our actions, could we prevent anti-Semitism from being normalized in our country? Could we actually achieve that? I'd also add, I've experienced anti-Semitism sporadically since early childhood through my higher education, work in healthcare in the US and UK. My grandfather, Kalman Levine, changed his name to Frank Stuart Coleman in London to avoid anti-Semitism in his profession of medicine. When I was 6 or 7, a little girl in my first or second grade class got angry with me, this was in London, because I had killed Christ, which she accused me of. I remember being stunned and unable to respond because I did not know who Christ was. Subsequently, and through the rest of my middle school and high school education, I was accused of being greedy with money, good with money, taking other people's money, and most importantly, having money thrown on the ground in the playground and being told to pick it up. I rarely, if ever, reported this to my parents and never to the teachers or administration. This was in the 1970s. That is what normalized anti-Semitism looks like at school, university, at work, and so forth. The peak of anti-Semitism, high school that I attended, was when I was on what was called prefect duty. That was where the older boys had to look after the younger boys. This is a boys' school of 1,200 boys, aged 9 to 18. Quite a daunting prospect to be policing that system. And you patrolled the corridors to these long Victorian corridors of this long extended Victorian school for the purpose of stopping boys from shouting, running, and swearing. I came upon a classroom. There was a thronging crowd chanting and unclear what exactly was going on. I approached the classroom and realized they were chanting, "Hang the Jew." I was 16 years old. I went into the classroom and found a small 10-year-old Jewish boy standing on a desk with a thin rope around his neck going up to a window high above the desk. We had these very high-ceilinged Victorian-style classrooms. You have to remember at this point that this is a British school. Therefore, the natural thing for me to ask was, this assembled throng of 30 or 40 boys of various ages in a Lord of the Flies type of moment, was, why are you hanging this boy? The chorus answered in almost harmony, because he's a Jew. I then, in my very British style, told them that they could not hang a boy in the classroom, to which they complained that there were no trees in the playground, to which I replied, that's your problem. And consequently, as I was engaging the crowd, took the rope off the Jewish boy's neck, and he ran away. Most importantly, what happened next was that my older brother organized the Jewish boys into a community directly. There were actually 120 Jewish boys, so 10% of the population of the school were actually Jewish, and formed a Jewish assembly, or equivalent of a Jewish affinity group in the school, which was then, the leadership was passed on to me and then my younger brother, in order to protect Jews within the school. This was allowed by the school, but with no support from the school. So you can see from my childhood, certain things were set in my mind about what one has to do when one faces anti-Semitism. My children here in Massachusetts have faced anti-Semitism in their educational systems, which they have absolutely reported to us as parents, and which we have tried to address directly with the relevant administrations. So how about healthcare? Do we hear about anti-Semitism amongst truckers? Do we hear anti-Semitism amongst the car rental business? Do we hear anti-Semitism amongst grocery store workers, construction workers, workers in the DHS, the DMV, air traffic controllers, even trade schools and community colleges? The answer is genuinely a resounding no. We hear about anti-Semitism in the heights of the Ivy League. In fact, there are graphs demonstrating that the majority of anti-Semitic events have occurred in the top academic institutions in this country. And we obviously have heard it in the context of the university here, Harvard. And I was part of the guiding group in the Anti-Semitism Task Force, which is fully open for the public to read the issues of anti-Semitism in the School of Public Health, the School of Divinity, the Law School, and the Medical School. All places where you would have thought that would never happen. To Rabbi Robinson's request about experiences from the trenches in healthcare, there was the Boston Mapping Project in 22, which set out to eliminate the Zionist entity in Massachusetts, which was declared as blatantly anti-Semitic by many Massachusetts politicians, and in which my work and my name were clearly labeled. In fact, my son found it on the internet. There's been the extreme escalation following October the 7th, and I mean October the 8th, 2023 onwards, of anti-Semitism. I've been told to consider that anti-Semitism and the meaning of anti-Semitism was under discussion by non-Jewish staff to work out what was anti-Semitism in the hospital. Witnessed postings by hospital staff of clearly anti-Semitic material on public-facing social media outlets, witnessing Jewish staff in great distress, and questioning things like, am I recognizably Jewish because of my surname? And should I change it like my grandfather did? These are questions asked in 2024 in a hospital system in Massachusetts. And that's just one of the questions asked. We ran a survey. 25% of the respondents in the hospital system reported fear coming into work in the hospital. 75% reported hiding their Jewish identity at work. All of this was reported in real time to our administration, and we found allyship with our administration within our hospital system to address this. Hospital listservs for doctors and healthcare workers being co-opted for extreme political messaging. And most importantly, in my mind, the enormous impact on the most junior staff in educational systems. So whether it's a medical school, nursing school, psychology school, social work school that were affiliated with the hospital, where in an attempt that everyone does when you're young to fit in, they were finding Jewish students were finding themselves ostracized out of these organizations. There's a current serious issue in Massachusetts that if you want to become a psychologist, and the American Psychologists Association is putting out messages and efforts which are against Israel that you don't agree with, how do you maintain your membership of that professional organization? This is a really significant issue, given that that membership of the professional organization may be critical to your career. So, last of all, and it's a deep subject, is concern by some Jewish patients about seeing healthcare workers who had posted anti-Semitic or anti-Israel statements on their public-facing networks. Hospitals are sanctuaries of trust between people, and that could be so readily broken if that is allowed to continue. And so far, again, with the allyship of the hospital system I'm working in, we have been addressing that as those issues have come up. So what did we do? Well, based on my childhood, we immediately organized and formed a Jewish employee resource group at Mass General Brigham. It's been up and running with the support of the institution. We have identified unbelievable heroes who, many of whom I'm going to name now in this synagogue because their names need to resound through this room. Dr. Elise Park, Dr. Dan Karitskas, Dr. Maria Hutchins, Judy Greenberg, Dr. Carol Ehrlich, Dr. Paulina Tesliar, and many others who I don't have time to mention. I have met real heroes, and amongst junior staff, particularly Dr. Alyssa Greenhouse and Dr. Ariel Bernstein, remarkable young doctors who stood up in an enormous system against the unjustifiable anti-Semitism that they were experiencing. We demanded in our organization accountability, education about anti-Semitism, work within the rules of the hospital so there could be zero tolerance for hate or discrimination or bias based on national origin or religion. Just as an example, and thanks to Rabbi Nesson, we are holding our second October the 7th memorial service in the MGH Chapel, proudly and honorably there, again with the support of our hospital institution. And I emphasize the importance of establishing allyship with organizations beyond the Jewish community, at the same time as establishing and supporting the network of Jewish organizations like ADL, JCRC, the American Jewish Medical Association, just to name a few. The last thing that we did was to testify in front of the Massachusetts Commission on Anti-Semitism about the experiences in healthcare education and healthcare itself. These are important things for all of us to do without fear. Now, there's a second layer of all of this that we're all aware of, and it's sort of categorized by yet another thing in the list of things besides being greedy or good with money or whatever, is the anti-Zionism component and the toxic anti-Israel sentiment, the sort of quiet Israeli boycott, and even the canceling of the word and use of the word Israel in our community and in the hospital system. People self-edit out that word for fear of the opprobrium that they worry will come with just saying the word Israel. We have people, students, who will say they are from California or some other state in order to avoid saying that they're from Israel. This is a terrifying component of it all. So what have we done about that? We've organized a group called Kalaniot, the Harvard Medical School chapter of Kalaniot, which serves to support Israeli scientists, postdoctoral scientists, medical fellows and medical students from Israel to come here and spend time in our hospital system. We've raised significant amount of money to do that. And most incredibly, we've had remarkable events that have just shown what this process can do for understanding Israel when you bring healthcare professionals. I've always am nervous when I introduce the first Israeli doctors or students into the system, in our system, like how will they experience it? And interestingly, after a week with the most recent doctor who visited, I asked her, she's a radiologist from Soroka Hospital who spent a month in radiology at Mass General, again with the support and allyship of our hospital system, how are you getting on? And I was worried, I was anxious. It's 2025 and not an easy time for Israelis. And she said, oh, I'm having a fabulous time. I've made friends with 2 Lebanese and 1 Egyptian doctor. We have lunch together. We're having a great time together. I had another doctor visit who is from the Arab-Israeli community, and in front of some other doctors, he asked me, why, and in earshot, why are people trying to destroy the jewel of the Middle East? And I was like, what do you mean, the jewel of the Middle East? And he said, Israel. And I could see that the reaction of my colleagues was like, whoa. So these communicating components between Israelis and US physicians, healthcare workers, are enormously important to maintain. And in fact, we have regular now US-Israeli scientific seminars between Israeli and US scientists so the information can be shared. So what must we do here on Sukkot as we symbolically build a community shelter in the unrelenting harshness of a desert? First and foremost, celebrate and enjoy our Jewishness and our community. Without any question at all, that's top of the list. Leverage the strengths of our community, our persistence, our strength, our intelligence. Actually, interestingly to me, evidence that the high holiday services, both ones I attended in the UK recently and here, are the coming together in an incredible scale of the community led by Rabbi Garden Schwartz just in the past few days, staggering. Recognize of the importance and support of the organizations that protect Jews here effectively. And, as I said, support them, including our organization, the Jewish Employee Resource Group at MGB, and Kalaniot. It's important for us to dig deep and support those organizations that support us at this time, and including our synagogues, of course. We must recognize and support the entities that protect us as Jews and Israelis, including the democratic process, the law, our synagogues, places of Jewish learning, the police, our security officers who protect our places of worship, organizations here that combat anti-Semitism, including ADL, Project Shema, the JCRC. We must also support those who support the safety of Jews and Israelis in Israel, including, of course, the emergency and routine medical services and hospitals in Israel, and importantly, the IDF. But coming back to this point, most of all, on Sukkot, we will celebrate, we will organize and form and support our Jewish and Israeli community loudly. We must not be silenced or go quietly into the night. Thank you very much, and Hag Sameach.
Hag Sameach.